Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Please welcome the Executive Director of the American Astronautical Society, Mr. Jim Way.
Good morning. Good morning. How is everybody? All right? Coffee, donuts? Donuts. Pretty cool. Yeah. Well, welcome to day 3. I am Jim Way. I'm Executive Director of the American Astronautical Society. It's great to have you here. Great to have you back with us, and hopefully you enjoyed the previous 2 days. I thought they went great. And I would like to just pay special thanks to our previous 2 hosts, Patrick and Jennifer. They did a great job. Congratulations. Good job. And today it's my turn, and I hope I can do as well as they did. So, just a quick morning exercise. It's tough with the lights here, but who here has gone outside at night and seen the space station fly overhead? Raise your hands. Good. Excellent. All right. Now, who here has not? Process of elimination. Oh, just a couple. Don't be shy. Raise your hands. Come on. All right. I was going to tell everybody to look at those people who haven't done that and give them kind of a WTF look. But anyway, since you've all done it, we won't bother with the whole spotthestation.gov thing, spotthestation.nasa.gov thing, but it is super cool, and I encourage everybody to do it. All right, so just a few quick words. What's that? Visible pass tonight here. So check it out, spotthestation.nasa.gov. Wave high, I promise you, Jessica will wave back. All right, just a few quick words about the American Astronautical Society. We are a technical society that was founded in 1954. At this event, we are engaged in the planning of these main sessions, but also we're responsible for the technical sessions that happen each afternoon. So hopefully you're enjoying those and getting a lot out of them. We strive to bring together a very diverse set of industry colleagues to engage and discuss space exploration and science. Where are we now? Where are we going? How are we going to get there? That kind of thing. One of our main activities is holding events similar to this one, and discuss the opportunities and the challenges of various plans and proposals in work, and most importantly, connect colleagues with each other to forge valuable and long-lasting relationships, kind of a dating thing for the space industry. Our next event is our Astrodynamics Specialist Conference, August 8th through 11 down in Charlotte. And then we have our Von Braun Symposium in late October, October 26th through 28 down in Huntsville. Encourage you all to join us for those. More information on that is available at astronautical.org. So, we're here on the last day. It's hard to believe, but it's been great so far. We have a full day of panel and technical sessions lined up. So before we get into our first panel, I did want to just make something of an announcement. Unfortunately, we did have 2 positive COVID tests out of the event yesterday. So, mask up, do whatever you want to do to make sure that you're keeping yourself and each other safe. So please just be aware of that. So before we get into our first session, I'd like to invite up Ray Lugo, CEO of the ISS National Lab, and Christine Kretz, Vice President of Programs and Partnerships at the ISS National Lab, to announce a special award.
I'm going to have you slide in the middle. Thank you. Good morning. Thank you, Jim. Appreciate it. It's my honor today to announce this award, the Dr. Atope Essen Award for Student Excellence in Scientific Presentation and Honorary Recognition by the ISS National Laboratory for an outstanding student contribution to scientific advancement in space, presented during this conference. And this is the inaugural award. The award launched today is given to a student whose work presented at the conference, I hope you all saw the poster sessions, captures the spirit of science in space for life on Earth. It is presented in honor and the legacy of Dr. Essen. He was a member of my team, a member of our team, a member of our community, and a real Renaissance man. An esteemed colleague, aerospace professional, engineer, scientist, a musician, a father, and a mentor. And part of our team here, He was really embracing student activity and mentoring and bringing along the next generation. So with that, and with his great spirit of collaboration, advocacy for inclusion and diversity, coupled with a keen technical acumen that continue to guide him, we present this award. The winner of the first award for ATOPE Essen for Student Excellence is Takashi Sato. Is Takashi in the house?
I think we're going to have Chris Fang except for Takashi Sato. No? We have Takashi in there.
Takashi's not here, so with that, we will mail this presentation to Takashi. But let's give a warm thank you and welcome. Thank you very much.
Christine Ray, thank you very much. Congratulations, Takashi. Dr. Essen was a man of deep intellect and commitment, and so that award in his honor is tremendous. So now on to our first panel of the day. It is my pleasure to introduce Karen St. Germain, Earth Science Division Director at NASA. In her role, Karen provides executive leadership, strategic direction, and overall management of the entire agency's Earth science portfolio, including technology development, applied science, research, mission implementation, and operations. Prior to coming to NASA, Karen was the Deputy Assistant Administrator Systems for NOAA's Satellite and Information Service. She guided the ongoing development and deployment of NOAA's two major satellite programs, the Joint Polar Satellite System and GOES-R series, the Cosmic 2 mission, and the Space Weather Follow-On. She also led the development of next-generation capabilities that will replenish and augment these systems in the future. Karen will be the moderator for this first session of the day, discussing our environment, biodiversity, as well as the ecosystems of our planet and potentially other planets as well. Please welcome Karen.
Thank you. And come on out. Good morning. It is so great to be here. I'm a little disappointed. I was expecting the walk-up music, but all right. We'll try to bring some energy to the topic. So I'm going to take a little bit of moderator prerogative and spend a couple of minutes talking with you about what we do in NASA Earth Science, because when most people think of NASA, they don't necessarily think of Earth Science. But it's great to be here with all of you, and we're really excited to share what we do with all of you. So, but before we get into the panel, I'm just going to just take a moment here, and I don't know, there we go. Oh, it did work. Where is it showing? It's showing over there. Okay, I was expecting it back here. All right, so yeah, most people think of exploratory science, exploring the universe, exploring other planets and so forth, when they think of NASA science. But what they don't know is that the planet that NASA studies most is our home planet. And that vantage point of space allows us to really understand how Earth works as a system. And the program we have here at NASA is unique in the world in that it is end-to-end, from technology development, discovering and developing new ways of looking at our Earth, to launching missions, to the research and analysis that extracts the meaning from those observations. And of course, all of that depends on an enormously sophisticated data and computation capability. And then we also have an applied sciences division, which takes all of that science and tries to push it out to people who can use it to inform their everyday decisions. So it's a unique capability, and this is our fleet. We have something in the neighborhood of 25 different missions looking back at our home planet, observing everything from ice to land to oceans to vegetation, in the atmosphere. And you can see on the inner part of the swoosh here, the missions that are on the International Space Station. So we have this diverse portfolio from satellites that are the size of a coach bus all the way to CubeSats, free-flying, as well as our instruments on the space station. And it's this combination, this portfolio of missions that allows us to really understand how the Earth works as a system. And that's critically important. We are in a period where the Earth system is changing. We know, you all have heard about the warming climate, the warming atmosphere. What you may not know is that something in the neighborhood of 94% of the excess heat that is trapped in the Earth system is absorbed by the oceans. This is the excess heat due to greenhouse gases. The oceans move that heat all over the globe. And so we're not just seeing an increase in temperature, we're seeing changes in weather patterns driven by those, that heat moving around the globe through the oceans. You're looking here at aerosols. Aerosols play an enormous role in both our weather and our climate. And I like this animation because it ties together what we can understand about naturally occurring phenomena, aerosols that originate from Saharan dust, for example, as well as human-driven aerosols, and see how they all play together, because it's not just about the natural systems, it's about the interaction between human communities and the natural systems. With the observations that we can make from space, we can, as I said, develop that understanding. We capture that understanding of how the system works in models, and those models give us predictive capability. And it's that predictive capability that we can then press into service for the benefit of mankind. So that's sort of the scope of what we do, and what we're going to now focus on is 3 missions on the ISS that are contributing in very important ways to to this overall mission. So with that, we'll get right to the panel. I don't know, let's look down and see if I actually said anything I was supposed to say. It's always a journey of discovery. Anyway, all right, so we're going to turn to our panelists one by one for a discussion of their missions. So joining me to my right immediately here is Ralph Dubayah. He's the PI for the GEDI mission. To his right is Abhishek Chatterjee, and he's the PI for OCO3. And then on the far end of the stage from me is Simon Hook, the PI for ECOSTRESS. Thank you all for joining me today, and I'm really looking forward to hearing what you have to say, and we'll have a few minutes later to have a conversation. So let's start with Ralph. I'm going to hand over the clicker.
Great, thank you very much. I've never given a talk sitting down before, so this is interesting. And again, I'm the PI of the GEDI mission. It's really an honor to be able to talk to this particular group of people, because the ISS has been so critical for this climate science that all these missions are engaging in right now. So GEDI is an Earth Ventures instrument, and what you see there is the instrument in thermal vac. It has 3 lasers on it. It has a 0.8 meter beryllium mirror. We fire these lasers at the surface of the Earth, and we measure how tall trees are in the underlying canopy. And what you see, the kind of data that we get back is shown there on the right, where we get how tall the trees are, where the branches and leaves are vertically, as well as the sub-canopy topography. And we use that data to answer important questions about the carbon cycle and biodiversity and other things. It's a joint project between the University of Maryland and NASA Goddard. We've been operational since April of 2019, and the DAC says the data have been downloaded 1.5 million times. That's great. This is my favorite picture of GEDI on the ISS. It's the white box in the foreground. You can see an astronaut spacewalking. What an incredible platform the ISS is to enable all this science, but also having all these human endeavors on it at the same time. And even with all this complex stuff going on, star trackers, GPS, and all that, we can still do this incredible climate science that's answering really important questions. So here's what GEDI basically does, as I said, is we measure how tall these trees are, and we use that information to be able to answer these important questions that you see on the right, which is what's the carbon balance of the Earth's forest, How are forests and the land surface in general going to mitigate atmospheric CO2 concentrations in the future? We also use GEDI for biodiversity studies and these applications that you see there on the right. So to understand what GEDI does, look at this map. This is a map of deforestation over 20 years from Landsat. Anything that's colored there has been disturbed or burned, for example. And so when you burn trees or you disturb them, they represent a potential source of atmospheric CO2 that will go into the atmosphere. And so the question we're trying to answer is, how has deforestation contributed to atmospheric CO2? Here's an example of the carbon emissions that happen from fires just for California. And you see in 2020, they're going off the scale. This is because trees have weight. They have a biomass, and half of their weight is carbon. And so if you burn these trees, that carbon makes it up into the atmosphere. Now, the flip side of that is, how much carbon will forests absorb in the future? Because when you have young, rapidly regrowing trees, for example, look at the cartoon on the right, these young, rapidly regrowing trees grab a lot of carbon out of the atmosphere. What GEDI is trying to answer is, what's the balance between disturbance and degradation that you see, for example, with land use change on the left, and the subsequent carbon sequestration from forests, what we call the land sink. So GEDI is trying to find that balance, and that's essential for predicting future CO2 concentrations, as are the observations that we're getting from these other two missions, ECOSTRESS and OCO3, that we'll hear about. So here's a cartoon of what GEDI does. It has 8 laser beams. They're going across the surface of the Earth. They go wherever the ISS happens to go. And then we slowly build up this 3-dimensional view of the Earth's forests over time. These are for the forests over the Pacific Northwest. And so through time, we're getting this 3-dimensional view of where all the trees are, the leaves and the branches, and we then use these data to answer the important questions. So the theme of this conference is the decade of results, and so let's look at a few results from GEDI. I always like to start with this map because it's a fantastic map. This is bare Earth topography. This is the best topography map of bare Earth that we have. Bare Earth means that we're seeing the ground below the trees, because LiDAR can go through the trees and actually get the ground. And this kind of data are useful for climate modeling, for sea level change, and the like. It's just a fantastic example. And we did this from the ISS. That's what's so exciting about it. Now, the main product of GEDI is this canopy height model that you see here. This, again, is the best current data that we have of canopy height globally, representing about 10 billion observations. It's not quite filled in. You see this kind of diagonal striping. That's because the ISS was in a 4-day repeat cycle for a couple of years. They've now gotten out of that cycle, and we'll get better longitudinal coverage going from east to west. So the primary product of GEDI is biomass, and this is a map on the top left showing the biomass of the planet. You can see that there's a whole lot of biomass in the tropics, in the Pacific Northwest, as well as the Northeast. Now, the real innovation of GEDI is that it also produces the uncertainty on that biomass. So we give you an estimate. We say, hey, this area has this many megagrams per hectare of carbon. But then we say, how accurately do we know that? We know that plus or minus 30 megagrams. GEDI is the first mission that's been able to do this and producing the first maps that have this transparent and statistically rigorous estimates of biomass and its uncertainty across the globe at high spatial resolutions. The reason we need to know the uncertainty is because we want to use these data for climate treaty frameworks as well as for predicting future CO2 concentrations, so we have to know how accurate they are. And so here's an example of showing that. We took all the GEDI data and we looked at individual countries and we calculated how much carbon do these countries have on their land surface. We compared that to what the countries themselves report to the UN FAO, which they have to do every year. And GEDI has estimated a total of 480 petagrams versus the 373 that are reported by the countries themselves to the FAO. That's almost 30% more, which could have huge climate implications. Now, many countries don't have very good forest inventories, and so GEDI is working with the FAO to use GEDI data to help provide better estimates going forward. GEDI data is also used in terms of the US actions towards greenhouse gas reduction, as well as what we call MRV, which is monitoring, reporting, and verification, to be able to contribute significantly going forward in those areas. Now, here's another great result, which is that protected areas of the world are key for climate mitigation. A protected area is a place like a national park where you don't have deforestation or you don't have degradation. And so using GEDI data, we estimated that 19 gigatons of biomass would have been lost through deforestation and degradation if those areas had not been protected. That's equivalent to 1 year of avoided global annual fossil fuel emissions. These results were not possible before GEDI, and they quantify the importance, really, of forest conservation towards climate change, because we can make a map that you see there, which shows how much extra carbon or preserved biomass we have, and we're doing this from the ISS, and so this is very exciting. So looking forward, again, the theme of this conference is a decade of new results. GEDI data are going to be key for new radar climate missions that are coming up, the NISAR mission as well as the ESA biomass mission. GEDI is going to play a prominent role in U.S. climate treaty activities. We're implementing the Paris Accords from the COP from 2015, and countries have to report in 2020, 2025, and 2030. GEDI data are helping these countries report their carbon for these periods. But NASA is also central in U.S. efforts in what's called the global stocktake, which we're trying to see where we are on this road to the Paris Agreement. And the first one's happening in 2023, and GEDI is one of the main sensors that are being used to do that. And again, it's on the ISS, which is incredible. We're also working with the Forest Service to look at how GEDI data are used for forest fire modeling, because the structure of forests is important to predict fuel fire loads and how they're going to move. That's shown on the right. And then lastly, the combination of all these three missions, GEDI, ECOSTRESS, and OCO3, is going to help us understand the stability and the fate of the Earth's carbon sinks and whether or not they will continue to absorb carbon going into the future. So thank you very much, and we'll go on to the next talk.
Yeah, thanks, Ralph. That was really exciting results. So Abhishek, what do you got?
Sure, yeah. So I'll just wait for my slides to come up. But yeah, good morning, everyone. So over the last couple of days, you may have heard a little bit from various panelists about the Orbiting Carbon Observatory 3 or OCO3 or OCO3. And so you might have been wondering what this mission is doing. And that's sort of exactly what I'm here to tell you about, give you a brief overview of this critical mission for carbon cycle and climate research, why it matters, what type of data we are putting out, and who is using them. So fossil fuel use, land use change, and deforestation, as well as other human activities, that has been increasing the concentration of carbon dioxide by almost 50% since the beginning of the industrial age. Now, the atmospheric growth rate would have been larger had it not been for the discount that we get from the terrestrial plants as well as the ocean that takes up nearly 50% of the CO2 concentrations that we emit. Now, at a very global scale, and as you also heard from Ralph's talk, at a very global scale, we have a pretty good understanding of this carbon cycle and what are the processes. But limitations in our measurement and modeling, that still ends up making it really challenging to get a good understanding as we get to finer spatial and temporal scales. Specifically, we are interested in learning more about the geographic distribution and quantity of carbon dioxide that's emitted through fossil fuel combustion and other activities. What are the processes that are controlling the rate as CO2 builds up in the atmosphere? And as we look towards the future, what are the impact of carbon management strategies on anthropogenic CO2 emissions? How can we monitor them, and how can we track the trajectory? This is exactly where OCO3 comes in. So OCO3 is one of NASA's 2 missions that is dedicated for studying atmospheric carbon dioxide. The first one is OCO2, which launched in 2014 and flies solo 700 kilometers above the Earth in a low Earth orbit. OCO3 launched in 2019 and is installed on the GEMI-F port 3. Now, OCO2, just because of the global nature of the measurements that it collects, it has been a game changer in understanding the natural carbon cycle, the natural sources and sinks, how the carbon cycle responds to events like El Nino, La Nina, other climate variability, droughts, floods, etc. But OCO3 adds a fundamentally complementary data set in helping us understand the anthropogenic carbon cycle, so specifically looking at emissions that are happening, how we can track them, and then estimating those emissions. This is primarily made possible because on OCO3 we have a very agile 2D pointing mechanism that's known as a snapshot area mapping mode. And what the SAM mode, which I would say was made possible primarily because of the fact that we are placed on the ISS, what this does is that it helps us zoom in on a target. So in this case, we are actually looking at a target over Poland, the Bełchatów power plant, which is the largest thermal power station in Europe and the 5th largest in the world. So we are able to zoom in on that target and then take very dense localized data over the emissions that are happening. These help us then get a better handle on the estimates that are being reported by the power plant, as well as do an independent check on those estimates. This dense, localized data really helps complement the near global measurements that we are getting from routine OCO3 and OCO2 operations. Now, it turns out that the SAM mode has been incredibly useful, a really handy tool for understanding the emissions that are happening from urban areas and megacities, which are actually responsible for about 3/4 of fossil fuel CO2 emissions. We can not only see where these hotspots are, these different cities, but more importantly, we can actually map the really fine-scale variations in CO2 emissions within a city boundary. So in this case, we are looking at the data that was collected over the Los Angeles metropolitan area on one overpass of the ISS. And wherever you see the high concentrations, that's like in the yellows and the greens, near downtown LA, and then as we get towards southern LA, Los Angeles airport, and then even getting close to Long Beach where the port is. So being able to resolve this intra-urban CO2 variations, this has immense implication because it helps identify the sectors that are responsible for CO2 emissions, then plan any kind of mitigation strategies, and then implement that. Now, there are a whole host of studies that have actually been looking at Los Angeles, as well as other cities like Salt Lake City, Paris, Riyadh. The bottom line or the main message that we are finding from all these studies is that measurement of atmospheric CO2 at the right scale and at the right time is incredibly important for any successful decision making. A recent study actually even reported that even within the US, on average, there is a 20% underreporting that happens across the cities. Now, all of these estimates that are developed, those are based on inventory and bookkeeping approaches, so really traditional techniques. But the SAM data that we are collecting from OCO3 and the snapshots that we are taking, that actually helps us then independently verify these estimates, as well as then sort of set urban mitigation targets and assess the outcome of those mitigation activities. Overall, I just showed one example from Los Angeles, but overall, we are taking SAMs all across the globe. So all the blue dots that you see on this map, they are all locations where we have taken this dense localized data. These include urban areas, megacities, different power plants, as well as other localized carbon sources. We also target some other specific locations, for example, like volcanoes, which are shown on the red dots in the map, as well as other areas that are of interest to the scientific community. Overall, we have taken around 9,000 SAMs till date. And then I would also point out that, as you see at the very bottom, we actually have a public website where you can go and then search for your favorite city or favorite location and see whether we have taken any SAM or not. All of the SAMs are publicly available there. Now, as cities and countries start moving towards new pledges and climate agreements, we are finding that there is a whole host of users, new users, that are sort of looking at this data and trying to understand what this data is telling us. This chart here just shows the number of users from different countries that are logging in to download and work with this data. And we have almost, within the last year, seen an inflection point where the number of users have doubled. The users span from all areas like developed nations, from Annex 1 countries to developing and non-Annex 1 countries. Now, of course, what we would ideally want to do is that use this data to inform national emissions as well as changes in and supporting the Paris Climate Agreement, something that Ralph also mentioned, and how this data can be used towards the global stocktake. How that is used, that kind of remains to be seen, but certainly there is a lot of information in the data sets that we are producing and making publicly available. And then just to summarize, OCO3 is a key element of a greenhouse gas observational network that we have in place right now. We are in the best, I would say the most exciting phase of the mission. We are collecting amazing data globally and then augmenting the science that's being made already possible by OCO2, and really fundamentally advancing or providing know-how on how we can use space-based assets to constrain anthropogenic emissions and monitor their trajectory. This has been made possible primarily due to the SAM mode of operations, which is like a unique mode that we have only on OCO3. And that is allowing us to look at these emissions at sub-regional, urban, and facility scales, so scales that are really relevant for policy and decision making. And then finally, I didn't get much to talk about this. Ralph also briefly mentioned this, but there is also a lot of value in combining this OCO3 measurements with information that we are obtaining from GEDI and ECOSTRESS to understand the carbon behavior as well as carbon storage in plants. This is something that we haven't fully explored or exploited yet, but certainly I know the scientific community is interested in looking at that. And I'll just end here and leave you with this map that shows the global CO2 data that we have collected from OCO3. This is like flying on the ISS. These are the data that we have collected from there. And it's sort of really fascinating to see the cycle of changes in CO2 concentrations as we go through seasons, emissions that happen more in the northern hemisphere, lower emissions in the southern hemisphere. Just seeing this entire data set, it's kind of really fascinating. So I'm always happy to talk more about the mission, hear more if you have any questions about the data, and thank you all for your attention.
Thank you so much, Abhishek. And now, Simon, over to you. Let's hear about ECOSTRESS.
Okay, thank you. So good morning, everyone. My name is Simon Hook, and I'm going to talk to you a little bit about an instrument called ECOSTRESS today. Now, in this room, it's nice and cool, but if any of you have gone outside, you'll realize that it's quite warm out there. And in fact, what's happening is we're having many more warm days than we've had in the past. And you've probably seen the reports in Europe and elsewhere about those hot days. Now, ECOSTRESS measures the surface temperature. And so what I'm going to do today is tell you how we are using those surface temperature data to look at a variety of different processes taking place on the Earth. So ECOSTRESS measures surface temperature, and because we measure surface temperature, we can use it for all sorts of different things. We can use it for looking at volcanoes, we can use it for looking at cities, and we can use it for looking at plants. And in fact, when we first started, the primary part of the mission was indeed looking at plants. And what this slide shows you is an image from ECOSTRESS, and it's an area in the Salton Sea, and those little squares that you see are farmers' fields. And basically, what we do is we measure the temperature of the plants, and on the underside of the leaves of plants are stomata, or pores, and the plants release water through those pores, and it allows them to stay cool. Now, if they have enough water, they can continually releasing it and continue to stay cool. And if they don't have enough water, they close those pores, and when they close them, the plants actually starve. So plants need to have enough water. And what you see in this image is the rate at which that water is being released by a process called evapotranspiration. And so if you look at those blue fields, you can see that they've got plenty of water, they're happily releasing and staying cool. If you look at the other areas, you can see that they're, the brown colors and things like that. Those fields don't have enough water, and there the plants are starting to suffer. So one of the ways in which we're using ECOSTRESS data is to actually look at farmers' fields, provide that information to the farmers so they can decide how much water to put on the fields, which is obviously very important to get what's referred to as the maximum crop per drop. Now, one of the beauties of the ISS is it flies over at different times of day. Most of the missions that we use always fly over at the same time of day. But you can imagine, if you're a plant, you behave differently throughout the day. So plants in the morning tend to be less stressed, and then in the afternoon, they tend to be more stressed because of the increase in temperature. And here is a great example of that from near the Nile Delta, where you can see those same fields with the pivot irrigation this time instead of the squares, and you can see the amount of evapotranspiration that's taking place, and those well-watered fields are all evapotranspiring, and that's why they are this blue color compared to the fields there in the morning. Now, the fact that we can do this is already recognized, and commercial companies already take these data, bring them into information systems, and in fact, you can download an app for your iPhone or your Android phone, and you can look up a particular field, and you can see how much water you should be putting on that field, and that's because of ECOSTRESS on the ISS. Now, one of the other things that's interesting about plant stress is that what we found is that I'm sure many of you are aware of the increase in the number of wildfires. And what we found is that the stressed regions are the regions that are most likely to burn. And in fact, if you look at this image, you see three actual images from ECOSTRESS. And we calculate something called burn severity, and that's the image that's the second one in there. And this is what's been calculated after the forest has burned. But if you look at the evapotranspiration image from ECOSTRESS, you can see that the patterns almost match the areas that have burnt. And so now people are using these data to look at the areas that are most stressed as a predictor of how intensely that area will burn. And as you can imagine, that's really helpful in terms of figuring out what's going to happen in the future. Now, we can also obviously detect the fire when it's burning. And this is an example of that. And you'll notice these two teal-colored lines going through the image. Those are actual major power lines running through California. And you can see that the fire broke those power lines. And when the fire gets close and breaks the power lines, that's when we get the power cuts in California and elsewhere, because they obviously have to turn off the power grid in order to protect it. And they have to rebalance the power grid. And this is just an example of how firefighters are using ECOSTRESS data in their day-to-day activities. And this is just an animation of that same fire, detecting those hot pixels associated with the fire front as it's progressing through the area that you can see, and these are the data that we pass along to the firefighters. Now, another thing you've probably heard a great deal about is the fact that we've had some really hot days and this urban heating. And here is an image from Las Vegas that we released recently, and you can see the grid pattern of the streets in Las Vegas. And the reason that you see that grid pattern is because those streets are tarmac and concrete, and they soak up the heat during the day, and then they release it at night. So if you're close to one of those streets, then it's going to be a lot hotter at night than during the day. And in fact, you've probably heard about various cities that have these problems associated with heating, like Phoenix, for example, or Los Angeles. And because we're on the ISS and we get data at different times of day, we can see how this heating changes through the day. And you can see this changing. And notice how when you see the blue image, it's got a very distinctive grid pattern associated with it. And that's those hot streets from a nighttime image releasing that heat. Now, obviously, that heat can be a problem. And it's a particular problem in areas which have a lot of concrete and tarmac and built-up areas, very few trees. And this tends to be the underserved areas. And this particular image is an image from an area called, in Los Angeles, a place called Stephanie Drive, where the city of LA has actually gone out and painted the streets white to try and keep them a little bit cooler. And this process actually cools the streets down by about 2 to 10 degrees. Now, we actually showed the ECOSTRESS image to the city, and the city then used that to advocate to the state for more funding, and this is why this is referred to as the $8 million image, because the person in the city who actually advocated to the state got that money to do remediation work. So this is a lovely example of where we're seeing ECOSTRESS and instruments on the station not only measure what's happening, but also measure when changes are made, whether those changes were effective or not. And this is an example of that. And so I'd like to just close there, and I believe now we're in the question period, so I'll hand it back to Karen.
Thank you so much. Just a round of applause for all three presentations. So I think you had some great examples of the impact of the observations that we're able to make from the space station, not just on our scientific understanding, but also on everything from policy decisions all the way to very tactical decisions like how we manage urban heat. You all referred to some synergies between the three missions that you manage. Can you say a word about the kinds of questions that, and I know we're just beginning to explore this, but what are the kinds of questions that we can answer because we have all three observations versus just one? Anybody want to take that question?
You want to
I'm happy to start.
Okay.
So basically, the three instruments, what they tell you is something about the structure of the plant, how tall it is, how it functions, how much water it's using and releasing, and then how much carbon, or in the case of crops, food, it's actually producing with things like OCO3. So by using all of them together, we get all of that information and we can see how they're changing. And so that's one of the real beauties of having all three instruments on the station. And certainly this idea of getting the plant function and the plant physiology is one that we're all very interested in exploring in the future.
Anybody else?
I'll just add to that with OCO3, so I primarily just talked about the CO2 measurements that we make, but another measurement that we do is, which is called as a solar-induced fluorescence, and that's actually a proxy for photosynthetic activity. And it's really those SIF measurements in conjunction with the evapotranspiration measurements from ECOSTRESS, as well as measurements of biomass from GEDI. All three taken together, that's what helps us understand the carbon uptake or the carbon storage in plants. And primarily, if you have an event, for example, like a drought or some kind of stressor happening, then how does that plant respond physiologically? That's something that we can really unravel.
Yeah, to echo that last point, for example, in the state of Maryland, we use GEDI data with an ecosystem model to predict future carbon sequestration for forests. The reason we want to do this is because we want to respond to greenhouse gas reduction legislation and the like. So you run these models forward in time, and the models may say, let's put trees anywhere you can grow trees. Let's plant trees in the soccer field. Let's plant trees on your grass lawn. Let's do all of that. But what we're not doing in these models is we don't know how these plants are going to respond if they're under stress. And we need to have more examples of what happens there. Just as if you have a tree in your backyard, if you don't water it, it's not going to spend much time getting fatter, right? It's not going to start to accumulate wood. It's going to say, I'm kind of done with that for now. And so we need to be able to predict how that's going to go forward through time. Another really good example of how these data come together is with EcoStress looking at fire severity. We can combine that with not only do we know these plants are stressed, but if we have their three-dimensional structure, they're stressed, they might ignite. We can also see whether or not there's any types of low materials so that we have ladder fuels going up, and we can get that from GEDI. Or we can also use them, as we said, to look at forest fuel fire mapping. And so we can combine all of them together to try to get this better predictive capability.
Great, thanks. Simon, you mentioned that plants are low stress in the morning, and then typically in the afternoon they are experiencing increased stress, and I can't help but think, yeah, life at headquarters is kind of like that too. All right, so let me pivot a little bit and talk about partnerships. Because, of course, in my position, what I'm really trying to do is maximize the amount of science we can do and the amount of impact we can have within our budget, right? Science and impact per dollar is what I'm about. And I think partnerships are really a key to getting more impact for our dollars. Do you all have thoughts on the value of partnerships, whether government, NASA, university, industry, and how those in particular might be enabled by the space station?
So in the slides I showed, I tried to really show three examples of partnerships. So when we talk about looking at how much water to put on a farmer's field, I am not calling up, or farmers aren't calling me up and saying, how much water should I put on my field? What actually happens, of course, is that we have people on the team that are from the US Department of Agriculture, and they work together with farmers' groups, and then it's these groups that actually decide how much water to put on the field. So it sort of goes all the way through the system. Mm-hmm. Similarly, when it comes to firefighting, I am not the one that's tracking the fire. Someone else is gathering that information and then passing that along to the firefighters. So that's another example. And then, of course, in the third case, when we're looking at the cities, it's the cities that are actually taking this information and using it. And of course, we could even have the example of the app where you've got this actually going into commercial businesses where they are pulling in these data and then using them for commerce.
Great. Other thoughts?
And yeah, I mean, and for the case of OCO3, we are starting to see a lot of partnerships happening with different cities, especially regulatory agencies, because as I showed, like for Los Angeles or Salt Lake City, once you can actually map the sectors that are generating the highest CO2 emissions, like whether it's a transportation or it's the energy or whether it's industries or specific like power plants or landfills or some other sources, then that just provides you a way to kind of mitigate and take any action to reduce those emissions. And again, just starting to think more into the future with all the pledges and climate agreements that are coming into place, that's where we are seeing a lot of those partnerships kind of helping, just making those connections with stakeholders and decision makers, and then providing the data so that they can then use that to take specific actions.
Anything to add?
Sure. Partnerships happen during the whole life cycle of a mission. And so GEDI is a good example because it's a partnership between the University of Maryland, which is actually the prime contractor, and NASA Goddard was responsible for the instrument. But then below that, there was a whole set of commercial partners that were involved in the development of the mission and different parts of the mission. And then we also have various academic partners. But the Earth Ventures program at NASA is a really great example of how these kinds of partnerships can work, because they enable somebody like me, who's an academic, to actually do a space mission, which is very exciting. Then after you have these kinds of data, as my colleagues have said, there's these opportunities to have more partnerships with how the data are used. And this is very important on the commercial sector, because the commercial sector can grow to be dependent on your data, and they want to do value added on the data as well. And NASA is very strongly pushes open science. And the open science piece of this means that these data are available to everyone at any time, as the algorithms are, as are all the code and all of that. And this becomes hugely important for our commercial partners that want to take these data and do something that's value added with them. And so it's hard for me to imagine without partnerships how any of this would be possible indeed.
Thank you so much. So we'll just wrap things up here with just a quick closing thought, which is, NASA always does inspirational science. In Earth science, we are also trying to have impact. If you read the World Economic Forum's Global Risk Report, you'll find that the top of the list is dominated by environmental risks, by natural environment risks, from severe weather to drought and so forth. And those are risks to global well-being. So as a result of that, we are seeing an ever-increasing demand for the kind of actionable information that we can provide that we can only get from space. And the ISS, a lot of what we do is from low Earth orbit, and the ISS has been instrumental in allowing us to do more of that work than we otherwise would be able to do. And so we really appreciate the ISS as a platform. We love the science that we're able to do there, and we're really looking forward to an exciting future in low Earth orbit. Thank you very much to the panelists. Loved hearing about your results. And thank you for the opportunity to present them to you today.
All right, thank you, Karen. Thank you, panel. That was truly eye-opening, for sure. So just touching back on something that was said there. First off, the space station, again, tonight, 9:08 and 10:44, you can see it go over. Not only can you see it go over, but you can get shot with lasers from GEDI, so that's pretty cool. Now that we're in this mindset of talking about our planet, let's take this conversation even further and discuss sustainability. and corporate engagement with the International Space Station. The ISS has been used to monitor global climate, ecological, and environmental change and natural disasters almost as long as there have been astronauts inhabiting the station. Collaborating with partners, the ISS National Laboratory is addressing global sustainability challenges head-on and making progress towards solutions that benefit life on Earth now and in the future. Our next panel, Sustainability and Corporate Engagement with the ISS, will highlight some of this work and the partners who are making it possible. The moderator for this panel is Christine Kretz, Vice President of Programs and Partnerships at the ISS National Laboratory. Christine's role is to identify opportunities for leveraging ISS facilities that enable science and technology research that will benefit life on Earth while maximizing taxpayer investment in the ISS. Christine and her team help interested organizations determine how best to approach research on the ISS and work through the process to accomplish the desired objectives. Please help me welcome back Christine to the stage and her panel. Christine?
Awesome. Hi, everybody. Good to see you again. I have some wonderful friends with me here. So first, let me introduce my panelists. I'm here with Carl Haney. Carl is an executive and chief technology officer, really, of the Estee Lauder Company. And Carl's worked closely with us on the Sustainability Challenge. And also Todd Klein from Tide. And he is my go-to guy on the Tide products and really working hard in work in space with Tide and has a Space Act agreement with NASA. So what we're going to talk about here today is that, so thank you for the introduction. Thank you very much. I didn't know we were going to have that here. I thought I had to memorize it. Anyway, so we're going to talk about is why companies like Procter & Gamble and like Estee Lauder are interested in sustainability and how they're using the International Space Station to really drive the technology that may find us new solutions here on Earth. The International Space Station has done a number of things in sustainability over the years, starting with some work with Target. So the Target Corporation funded $1 million of cotton sustainability research, and the last of those projects flew in January on the International Space Station SpaceX 24 mission, if I'm not mistaken. And that was the last of 3 that they hosted with us. Those were about cotton sustainability, drought measures, ways of making things with cotton use less water, because cotton is kind of a water hog of a plant. And so they were pleased with the results of that and continue to watch those, the efforts there. We should see some things being published from Clemson and the University of Wisconsin along those lines. With that, we had a sustainability roundtable at one of our sessions in 2019, and we had some ideas about how we can increase sustainability. And we had a small white paper, and we started to get together an idea about what we could use the space station for in sustainability. And that became a Beyond Plastics challenge that Estee Lauder joined us with. But then Tide was also working with, and as I understand it, contacted by NASA to say, how can you help us with cleaning, clothing, and exploration? And so those are kind of the baselines of how we got into the sustainability effort and who some of our partners are from a corporate standpoint. So I'm going to welcome you guys to tell us more about your work. Why don't we start with Todd? Can you tell us what's going on over there at Procter & Gamble, and what are you working on that is in space?
Sure. Well, maybe I can start with what we're doing here on Earth a bit from a sustainability standpoint even. And obviously from the last discussion, it's clear that the importance of bold and fast actions as it relates to climate change. So as a company, we have declared an ambition of achieving net zero for greenhouse gas emissions by 2040. So big ambition, but 2040 is a long way away, especially in a corporate atmosphere, as Carl can attest. So in addition to what we've achieved for 2040 for net zero, we also have some key milestones that we're focused on for 2030 as well that will eventually line up to what we're doing in space also. But with 2030, we've committed to achieving a 40% reduction in carbon footprint per use on our product. So think of that as the carbon footprint of the raw materials and the packaging that are used to make the products. Also, 100% of our packaging being recyclable or reusable, and a 50% reduction in virgin resin, so the new plastic that's used to make packaging. Carbon neutrality for our manufacturing sites, as well as a 40% reduction of water in our operations. So very big challenges as a company that we've taken on as part of the net zero commitment. But we're a science-based company, and the tool that we use for assessing sustainability is called life cycle assessment. And it's a tool that looks at the impact across every aspect of a product, from the making the raw materials and the packaging components, our manufacturing operations, getting the product out to consumers, also the consumer use phase. So for us, that's when a consumer does a load of laundry at Tide, and then also the end of life, so what happens with what goes down the drain and what happens with the packaging. And for the Tide brand, as we looked at the life cycle assessment, almost 70% of the carbon footprint of doing a load of laundry comes from the choice the consumer makes on whether they use hot, warm, or cold water. Switching from hot to cold is a 90% reduction in that energy, and warm to cold is a 70% reduction. So in addition to, as a company, we've committed to net zero, at Tide, we've committed to getting 75% of loads on cold by the end of the decade. And that sounds small, consumers making a choice on turning to cold, but in reality, we do 35 billion loads of laundry per year in North America. So as we add that up, if we can get to 75% of loads on cold by the end of the decade, the impact is we would avoid 27 million tons of CO2 into the atmosphere. So that's the equivalent of the emissions to power both New York and San Francisco for an entire year, or 10x our total P&G operating emissions. So it's a big challenge we've taken on. So we have both net zero, but then also taking on the use phase. And it's a big challenge. One, we have to have products that work really well on cold, which ladders up to a lot of what's needed for in space. But also we have to convince consumers to try cold and get over that hump of you don't have to have warm water and hot water to get every load clean. So we talked about partnerships here. We've also had a lot of partnerships in that work of helping consumers make changes in their choices. One of my favorites with the National Football League, we did a program with them last year where 16 of the NFL teams actually did all of their laundry with Tide on cold. And it was part of our campaign of if it's tough enough to tackle the NFL stains, obviously it's going to work for you and your household. So the NFL is a great partnership. Hanes with really reaching consumers when they buy product, and also on the care labels, reminding them of the importance of washing on cold, and also working with WWF on how do we just turn washing on cold into the next eco habit. People think about turning off the lights today, but they don't necessarily think about cold water washing. So that's a lot of our work, both the technical work to make products that work great on cold, but then the consumer behavior change on how do we get them to do it.
But as we speak, your product is right now on the station.
That's right. We have a prototype we've created. NASA actually contacted us back in 2019 with questions about, we have a product called Tide Pure Clean. And if you've seen our advertising for turning to cold, it's called Cold Callers. NASA actually made a cold call on us and was asking us some questions about Tide Pure Clean. And when NASA calls, we don't usually get that call. So we were intrigued on why are you calling? And as we started discussing, it was about there's a real challenge with deep space exploration and laundry of today there's not a way to do laundry in space. So the astronauts wear their garments and then they're disposed of. And as we think long-range travel, that would require about 450, 500 pounds of textiles to be shipped out for long-range travel, so per astronaut. So obviously it becomes a big challenge. So we started working on what are the challenges that they're trying to solve, and it was very much about low temperature or low resource of energy, which to us led to low temperature, water scarcity, which is obviously a huge sustainability challenge here on Earth that we're trying to work against as well. And there just seemed to be a lot of overlap on what the needs were for scarce environment in space that we could apply back here on Earth. So we started doing work and we created Tide Infinity, and we have the raw materials in space right now. So we have a study underway at the space station for looking at stability of our raw materials. And tomorrow, we actually have our first stain removal test that will happen, where we've sent several different types of food stains and body stains, and astronauts will actually be running experiments on stain removal to look at early prototypes.
That's amazing. And it's exciting always when you're watching your work being done on the station by the astronauts who are currently there. Carl, we found you a couple years ago right after our last conference, and we were starting to talk about plastic sustainability, and we came and visited your company in New York, and we were happy with the reception that we got. And we got started on that, but you've been doing more than just working with us on sustainability. So tell us a little bit about what you're working on.
Sure. And first of all, we'll be talking more about what we're doing on Earth, and then we'll get into what we're going to do in space. But first of all, we're a company. We're a prestige beauty leader. We have 4 categories, which is hair care, skin care, makeup, and fragrance. And we've got beloved, coveted brands like La Mer, Clinique, MAC, our name brand, Estee Lauder, Bobbi Brown, Tom Ford. So we have a portfolio of brands across these categories. And packaging is very important in those brands. And as a family-led company, our founder felt it was very important to be thinking about things long-term. So we have principles and values that are family-based that are about how do we think about sustainability on a very long-term basis. And that's in our DNA from our founder to improve, and help people as well as the planet. And as a result of that, we spent quite some time looking at what can we do with sustainability end-to-end across our enterprise. And very similarly, we have goals across many different areas. Today, I'll talk a bit more what we're going to do in packaging, but we do sustainability efforts across our value chain, making, buying, delivering. We use green chemistry principles to design greener products every time we launch a product. And we do so in innovation. And just one of the unique things about our company is 25% of our innovation is new every year. That gives you 25% chance of improving sustainability every year. And with time, that becomes accretive, right? So that's really how we approach it. And then the Beyond Plastics Challenge was just brilliant, right? Where a call for papers and call for proposals on how might we reduce plastic waste? How might we create and invent new feedstocks? How might we reduce and eliminate virgin plastic? So we were very, very encouraged with this unique partnership. I know it's an exclusive partnership in beauty care, and it's just been fantastic to be working and seeing the proposals of those teams. And in terms of goals, when we think about, and by the way, one of the things we loved about the teams is we had such a number of the proposals led by women or co-led by women, Christine, and that was really important because our company is very female-based. And if you think of my organization of 1,000 scientists and engineers around the world, 65% are women. Every technical center in the world is led by a woman, and we're very proud of that because it fits with the DNA of our company. And then on to sort of like our goals, similarly to other companies, our goals are very specific. And I'm going to give you our 2025 goals, which sounds like tomorrow in space terms. But our 2025 goals is, we want to get to 75% of our packaging to be what we call the 5 Rs: recycled, recoverable, reusable, refillable, and recycled. We want to use 100% PCR, 100% FSC carton board, and we want to get to 25% of our packages to have PCR. So these are just some specific examples that we use to establish our goals, and we set these goals some time ago, and we're well on our way to deliver those goals by 2025. And the last thing I would say is just an example, just to bring things to life of the impact, is our Estee Lauder brand, which is one of our critical brands in skincare and beauty care, is just launching our newest innovation, which is Revitalizing Supreme. And this product is converting to a glass and refillable platform. And to give you a sense of the numbers, it will reduce 370,000 375,000 pounds of plastic. It will also reduce over 6 million gallons of waste. It will reduce 3.5 million kilos of CO2. And beyond that, the refill uses 90% less plastic. So that just gives you a sense of how we are, on Earth, taking sustainability and acting on it. But then we're super excited about what we're going to be doing in space.
We're super excited about that too, and it's been a joy to work with both of your teams. You've brought many people to the projects with you to work really hard on selecting things, working out the problems, doing the operational side, and for all of our teams, it's really been a joy. So we've just had a great time with them, but it's really about the science and selecting things that make sense. So Carl, in your organization, the work that you're funding isn't your own research. So for those of you who sponsored programs are that money comes from a company, but then projects come from outside that, from third parties. So you stepped up and said, we want to pick these projects. And you helped us to actually evaluate them. So you didn't just stand back and say, go get them. You said, hey, what can we look at here, and let me help you as a scientist. So tell me about some of the things you saw and what made you excited about it.
Well, the first observation is that almost all the proposals had multidisciplinary science: biology, physics, chemistry, obviously microgravity, biomechanics, automation, AI. I mean, just the breadth of science that we saw in the proposals was stunning. The second thing I would say that was the ambition. Many of these proposals had extraordinary ambitions to reduce things tenfold, to have a scalable impact. And then the other thing from a science point of view is, do we see a path for commercialization and scaling, and not only to do this for our company, but for our industry, right? The outcome is we want this to be scalable for our industry to improve the people on the planet in aggregate, not just a specific brand or company.
Yeah, and that was fun when we watched all of the people giving us their pitches and telling us about their projects. And to have you involved with that was really, I think, a great help from an industry perspective of looking at the projects. Now, in your case, Todd, you're working kind of for a client, if you will, for NASA, but with your product. But your product has both, I think you're looking at it for Earth reasons, but also for exploration. How do you see the future of a product in space?
Yeah, the overlap is really what drew us to this. When we talked about what were the challenges for doing laundry in space, they lined up so well with what we have to solve for the coming decades on Earth, just as we got into really specific problem statements of it's got to be low or no energy. Well, for us, that translates to, it's got to wash on cold. We have to have innovation in machines that also operate on extremely low energy beyond the energy to heat the water. It has to be product that is recoverable from the water so that the water can be recirculated and become drinking water. So we immediately went to, that means we want to use as little mass as possible in the detergent, and also it needs to be fully biodegradable, anything we're pulling out of there. So low mass for us means we're using things like enzymes and polymers and chelants that can clean with very little of the material and less surfactant and solvent, which enables being able to pull it out for recovery of the water. But as we think on-Earth application, a lot of the way we get to very low carbon footprint formulations is get more dependent on catalytic chemistry and low mass items and pull out the really heavy mass items. And then water scarcity, we have a really big focus on water scarce regions. We just made another recent announcement here on Earth for 18 water stressed areas, and we're going to make sure that we're actually returning as much or more water than is consumed in our manufacturing sites into those regions. So in the US, Los Angeles is one area that's impacted with that. And learning on how do we clean with extremely low water, because we can't send a ton of water up for laundry in space. There was just such an obvious longer term application here. So I think what drew us to it was the science of the problems had really clear applications that we could bring back to Earth that were really congruent with what our sustainability strategies are.
I think that's really interesting, and I think there's a history of working with NASA and space explorers and having those products have impact on Earth. And everybody talks about Velcro as an example. But I'm imagining as we become more of a spacefaring nation and our world moving off planet, the idea that we're going to be clean while we do that is important. So during this conference, we've been talking to the private station owners, and I'm sure they're going to be excited to hear that they might be able to clean their clothes while they're on a private station up there, and they're here at the conference. But it's also exciting to those of us who think that we can maybe use less water and have some changes to the planet, really see a new way of kind of doing the laundry and keeping things clean. The numbers that you cited of 35 billion loads of laundry, I mean, I don't know about you guys. I feel like I do a lot of laundry, but I'm not sure 35 billion loads. So that's an amazing number of things that were being laundered. Carl, I said you were participating with us with looking at the different projects and seeing their pitches and actually talking to the researchers. We're going to announce here in just a little bit, we're going to announce who the winners are, whose projects will fly to space. But you want to stay connected with them.
Yep.
You don't want to just say, good luck, guys, go to space. Tell us how you plan to stay connected.
I plan to be personally connected, and we'll establish either quarterly or semestral reviews. I want to make sure that how we can help with the research, how we can then take learnings and then apply it. Maybe even do work on Earth as we're doing work in space, right? So the idea is this is not a one and done. We view this as an ongoing effort. We've big believers in research, but we'll look at how we can augment that research with our resources. And then ultimately, we want to be able to commercialize and scale for the benefit of industry.
And we talked a little bit about the projects. We had such a wonderful array of projects to consider that we were hoping to do one, but we are actually going to be announcing 2 projects that will fly.
Yeah, it was very, very tight. It was very close, and we felt to do justice, we really needed to fund both projects. And I must also say that we had an honorable mention. One of the proposals came from a 9th grader, and I don't know if that individual's in the room today, but really extraordinary proposal on how to support our Beyond Plastics Challenge.
I don't know if our honorable mention fella is here, but if he is, he can wave.
I don't see him.
He did have a super project. He was in 9th grade, and he was so poised and so well-spoken and so knowledgeable that we did feel like we just had to point him out as a young person in the pipeline of STEM that, put in a very good proposal, and we welcome that. And as a matter of fact, we're going to be doing another sustainability challenge in 2023, and we're looking for partners. And we are looking for partners exactly like your organizations, where we're working together. We certainly like the funding, and we appreciate that because it pays for the projects. But the insights that you all have when you're working with us, and your backgrounds and your products and your technology are really very valuable to us. And that's part of the engagement that we're looking forward to, and staying engaged with you is really important. This is the coming up on the decade of results, and you both mentioned some, timetables that you have for your organizations. And so I'm going to ask this question to both of you. If you could look ahead for the next 10 years and say, what will my results be? Tell me what you would want to see as results in the next 10 years.
I'd like to see things in market. I'd like to see things commercialized. I'd like to see the impact not only for our industry, but for the planet. I'd like to see a pipeline of projects, not just one project. So I would like to see this as a capability that creates value for the planet and is done in partnership with industry as well as the space station.
And Todd, how about you? You've got so many things that you've got coming up.
Yeah, I don't think I could say it better than Carl. That's really our measure as well. And this is actually our second time working with ISS. We had some Febreze research several years ago on colloidal chemistry, and we practice that today. So we've got some history of getting learning in space that we've applied back to products here on Earth. And I think, if we future cast 10 years from now, as much as we're all excited and getting to work with you at NASA and being a part of this, for us, the measure is in, did we come up with some insights and some inventions that fundamentally changes the way people do laundry here on Earth that just makes it so much less resource intensive than it is today, between the amount of water, the amount of energy, and coming up with both the product solutions, but also the machine solutions, the hardware to make it happen, and it starts getting applied. That's really the measure of success.
And again, it's been a science-based discussion in both cases, and with Target as well, that the science was at the core of it. But it's interesting to me that doing things in space gets the attention of general population, people who are interested in what you're doing, and it, I think, draws attention in a positive way to your brand. And Carl, in your organization, I think we talked about this too in a number of trade magazines. I'm going to tell you, I don't often get to do an interview in a magazine like Glossy. They're not usually calling me and saying, Christine, can you do this? Can you do this for me? So it was fun because we were working from technical and aerospace, but to a beauty industry that was excited to hear about it. And I had read somewhere that you guys had a bump up in sales just because of your work in sustainability and people's interest. It drew a crowd.
Yeah. Well, sustainability is critical for so many stakeholders, right? Consumers, investors. So it's really something that we have to do and we will do. You know, there's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. And you know, by doing that, I think we'll be rewarded over time.
And I think there's plenty of people working at Procter & Gamble who are saying, you know, we are doing the sustainability kinds of works in other products, not just Tide, but it's had a positive impact on like people's impression of your company because sustainability is becoming increasingly important in people's selections in the marketplace.
Absolutely. I think we continue to see consumer engagement grow. A lot of what we're doing today, we're trying to help consumers make sustainable choices that their motivation may not be sustainability. So for example, even if you look at our advertising copy for helping people choose cold, we really highlight you can save up to $150 per year on your utility bills. We also make it clear you can reduce your environmental footprint. We know everyone's not there yet on I'll make changes based on just reducing my footprint, but we look for multiple routes to get there, but we certainly see it continuing to grow on the number of consumers who really want to engage on it. And being able to tell the story of, and we're learning in space, I think that's just something that people get of, there's so many amazing technologies that have come back to Earth from there, and it gets people excited, both in the company and outside.
Yeah, and just the other thing I would say on sustainability in packaging is you can break the trade-off of luxury packaging can be sustainable. Right? And if you design it to be sustainable from the beginning and you have tools to do that, then whether it's your ingredients, designing more green chemistry into all our formulations, it allows us to break these trade-offs, and consumers want sustainable luxury. And that's what we're going to do.
Well, we certainly appreciate working with you again. We really just had so much fun putting together the ideas and shaping things around sustainability with you that, and again, you're an atypical investor in space. So your organizations have invested not only the money to do things, but the time and the resources. Your teams, when we would be on calls with many of your teams. So I'm glad to see that was valuable to you, continues to be valuable. Is there anything else that you want us to think about as we move ahead, some direction to us in the industry that we can move ahead and add on to our science objectives?
Christine, first of all, thank you and the space station for partnering with us. I just think that, having more different industries joining this effort, will create new connections and new opportunities for, individual companies, but also for a broader industry base. So, I'd love to see more partnerships from other companies and other industries joining this effort, because I think that, we're both in the consumer industry, but by having other industries involved, I think it could create an acceleration of scale.
Well, that would be wonderful. Any last thoughts, Todd?
No, I agree 100%. I think additional companies and also just the benefit we get of the scientists who work in the space industry thinking about, well, you know, things that we wouldn't think about for how we wash clothes or whatever the problem is you're trying to solve, the benefit that by doing it, you get from the scientists from a completely different discipline building on their ideas as we do the work.
Well, I thank you so much for joining us, not only in doing the work, but in our panel today and coming in for our conference. And we're just about to announce the winner, so I am going to stand up and
Thank you, Christine.
we're going to play you off stage, I guess. Where's the music? Cue the music.
Thank you very much.
Stage. Thank you so much. Thank you so
Tom.
much. Thank you. There we go, cued the music for me. With that, I'm going to invite a friend of mine who's become my friend from doing this. Stephanie Spodek from Estee Lauder is a senior vice president at the company, and she is the first person I started working with here at the Estee Lauder company in New York. And so we've teamed up and had a great time working together, but today we really want to announce our winners. So I don't know if you have our PowerPoints up. And a drum roll, please. Somewhere we have PowerPoints. There we go. Sustainability. This, again, is the Sustainability Beyond Plastics Challenge. And it was really difficult to select the winners. I think some of the winners may be here today. Instead of coming up on stage, if you worked on these projects and you're here in my audience, I would just like you to stand up and wave so everybody can pick you out of the crowd. So with that, Stephanie, why don't we tell everybody who won?
Okay.
The first winner?
So I'm going to do the first winner is Dr. Stephen Meckler. So if you're here or your team is here, stand up, everyone cheer.
From Stephen's team, that's the Palo Alto Research Center, PARC, and we are happy to have you today. Thank you for joining us. And now, because we said that we were so excited about him, we picked a second one.
We did. So I'd like to congratulate Dr. Kat Knauer and her team. If you're here, stand up so we can cheer.
Olivia, part of her team over there. Thank you very much. That team is from NREL and the Bottle Consortium, and we're really excited about their projects. Those projects will get started soon, and we will tell you more about them. Watch our website as we get ready to launch those products into space. Thank you all. And thank you, Stephanie.
Thank you.
All yours, Jim.